The moment alien princess discovers her childhood guardian was this human, the palace of Aurelian Prime floated above the planet like a crown of light, its crystal towers reflecting the blue curve of the world below. Inside those towers, Princess Sereth stood alone in the Hall of Records, surrounded by silence older than empires. The room was vast and circular, its walls layered with memory panels that held the history of her people. Soft light pulsed through the floor, responding to her presence, recognizing royal blood. Sereth was preparing for her ascension. In 3 cycles, she would become empress. Tradition required her to review the official history of the empire, especially the years surrounding her early childhood. It was meant to be a formality, something symbolic. She had survived a failed coup as an infant, a story told to every citizen as proof of imperial destiny. The empire had endured. The line had remained unbroken. She had heard the story many times. Elite guards fought bravely. Loyalists arrived in time. The attackers failed. End of story. Yet as Sereth moved her slender fingers across the air, activating the memory panels, she felt an unease she could not explain. Something in the records felt thin, too smooth, too carefully arranged. She paused at a section marked with restricted clearance. That was unusual. As heir, she had access to nearly everything. The system hesitated before responding, then allowed the files to open. Images formed in the air. Security footage from decades ago. The night of the coup. The palace alarm screamed in silence as the footage played. Armed figures moved through corridors toward the royal nursery. Sereth watched with a strange distance, knowing the infant in the recording was herself, yet unable to remember any of it. She leaned closer. The guards were fewer than she expected. Several fell quickly. Others retreated. The attackers advanced. Then the feed shifted. A new figure appeared at the edge of the frame. It was tall compared to her people, broad in the shoulders, moving fast but not with the grace of imperial soldiers. There was something rough about the motion, something improvised. The figure wore simple armor darker than standard palace gear, no visible rank markings. The figure stepped into the corridor and raised a weapon. Sereth frowned. The database tried to blur the image but failed. The figure was not one of her kind. It was human. Her breath caught. Humans were known to the Empire, but only barely. A young species from a distant sector, short-lived, physically weaker than most galactic races, useful for trade labor and limited security contracts. They were never placed near royalty. She quickly searched the record tags, guardian designation, species identifier. The fields were empty, redacted. Her tail stiffened in confusion. That alone was alarming. The Empire did not erase records without reason. The footage continued. The human moved forward alone, firing down the corridor, forcing the attackers to slow. Explosions shook the walls. Smoke filled the air. The human took cover, then advanced again, step by step. Sereth noticed something else. There was no retreat path behind him. He had sealed the corridor doors himself. He had trapped himself between the attackers and the nursery. Her chest tightened. The footage ended abruptly, replaced by an official stamp declaring the threat neutralized by loyal forces. But she had seen enough to know that was not the full truth. She deactivated the panel and stood very still, the silence of the hall pressing in around her. Her reflection stared back at her from the polished floor, regal and composed, yet her eyes showed unease. Why was a human there? Why was there only one? And why was every detail about him missing? Sereth turned and left the Hall of Records, her thoughts racing. Later that cycle, she summoned Archivist Thalen, one of the oldest living members of the Imperial Court. His scales were faded with age and his movements were slow, but his memory was unmatched. They met in a quiet chamber overlooking the stars. "You reviewed the early records," Thalen said gently. "That is wise." They were altered. At the time of the coup, our elite guardian orders were deployed across the empire. Few were willing to accept a post guarding an infant during a politically unstable period. It was considered undesirable. He was not meant to be a permanent solution, Thalen continued. Only until reinforcements arrived. It is a decision. A lone human did not fit that story. When she woke, her decision was already made. She ordered a private investigation into all records involving human auxiliary forces during that period. The council objected, citing protocol and relevance. She overruled them. As more fragments surfaced, a pattern emerged. Humans deployed to high-risk zones others avoided. Humans staying behind during evacuations. Humans holding lines that were never meant to be held, always temporary, always expendable, never remembered. Sareth stared at the growing collection of fragmented reports, her expression unreadable. The Empire had taught her that strength came from power and longevity, that those who lived longer mattered more. Yet her life existed because someone who lived briefly chose to stand anyway. She returned once more to the Hall of Records, activating the frozen frame of the human guardian in the corridor. The image flickered, distorted by old data corruption. She raised her hand and placed it against the light. "I am alive," she whispered, though no one was there to hear. "Because you stayed." Princess Sareth sat alone in her private study as the artificial dawn slowly brightened the walls. The room was quiet except for the low hum of the station's systems. In front of her floated dozens of data panels, each one filled with fragments of history that most of the Empire had never cared to read. They were all about humans, trade agreements, security contracts, evacuation reports. Casualty lists, so many casualty lists. She moved one panel aside and opened another, her eyes scanning line after line. Humans were always listed near the bottom: auxiliary force, temporary support, non-essential personnel. The words repeated again and again, yet when she looked closer, she noticed something strange. Whenever a situation had gone badly, whenever civilians survived against impossible odds, there were humans nearby in the records, not named as heroes, not mentioned in speeches, just present, like a quiet constant. Sareth leaned back slightly, her tail curling around the edge of her seat. This was not how the Empire described strength. Strength, she had been taught, came from long lives, powerful bodies, advanced technology. Humans had none of those advantages, and yet they appeared wherever endurance was required. A soft chime sounded at the door. "Enter," she said. Commander Viral stepped inside, his posture respectful but tense. He had served the Imperial Guard for over a century and was known for his strict loyalty to protocol. "You requested a status update on the investigation," he said. "I did," Sareth replied. "Sit." Most human units involved in palace security were reassigned or terminated within cycles. "Do you believe he died?" Across the Empire, humans were classified as a minor species. Few lived long enough to hold high positions. Fewer still were allowed into decision-making roles. They were useful, reliable, and replaceable. That was how they were seen. She had never questioned it before. Later that cycle, Sareth attended a council session. The chamber was filled with elders, generals, and ministers, their voices overlapping in controlled debate. The moment she entered, silence fell. "The heir wishes to speak," announced the chamber AI. Sareth stepped forward. "I have reviewed the historical records of the coup," she said. "I have found inconsistencies." "Those events were settled long ago," one elder said. "Reopening them serves no purpose." Yet one human stood alone between assassins and the imperial nursery. Yet the evidence suggests they repeatedly choose to stand in situations where survival is unlikely. It was a small facility, tucked between larger embassies, easy to overlook. Ambassador Helen Cross appeared on the screen moments later. She was older, her hair streaked with gray, her expression calm but alert. "Princess Sareth," she said, "this is unexpected." Just slightly, but Sareth noticed. "That name has not been spoken in imperial channels for many years," Helen said. "Was he important to you?" Sareth asked. Helen considered her words. "He was a guardian," she said simply. Sareth frowned. "That is not a rank recognized by the Empire." What promise? Humans do not stay because they are ordered. They stay because leaving would be worse. Always the same pattern, no expectation of reward, no record of praise, only duty as they understood it. One report caught her attention. A human unit stationed near the outer colonies during the same period as the coup. Their commander had written a personal log entry. "If we fall back now," the entry read, "no one else will hold the line, so we stay." She began to realize something the Empire had never understood. Humans did not measure success the same way others did. Victory was not always survival. Sometimes it was simply making sure someone else lived. Late one evening, she returned again to the frozen image of Elias Ward in the corridor. She studied his stance. The way his body angled slightly forward, not aggressive, protective. He was not trying to win. He was trying to delay, to buy time for her. Her claws trembled as she lowered her hand. "I never thanked you," she whispered. Outside the palace, the Empire continued as it always had, confident in its strength and history. But within Sereth, a quiet understanding was growing. The Empire had been protected not by destiny or superiority. It had been protected by a human who chose to stand where no one else would. And if that human was still alive somewhere in the galaxy, forgotten and unrecognized, then the Empire owed him more than silence. It owed him the truth. The training hall was empty when Sereth entered, its wide floor marked with old combat lines worn smooth by centuries of drills. She stood at the center, breathing slowly, trying to calm the thoughts that refused to rest. Since speaking with the human ambassador, her sleep had been light and broken. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the same corridor, the same lone figure standing firm while danger moved closer. She had grown up believing her survival was proof of fate. Now she understood it was proof of choice. The next report arrived quietly, buried deep in a logistics archive that had not been accessed in decades. It was not marked as important. It was not even marked as complete. That was why it had been missed. Sereth found it herself. The file was a damaged transmission log, time-stamped only hours after the coup had failed. Most of the data was corrupted, but one audio fragment remained intact. She activated it. Static filled the room, followed by heavy breathing. The sound of distant impacts echoed faintly. Then a voice spoke. "This is Ward," the voice said, male, tired, calm in a way that felt deliberate. "Nursery secured, doors sealed, power rerouted. Too many civilians still inside. I'll hold." "That was never meant to be found," Thalen said quietly. "Why?" Sereth asked. "Because it proves intent," he replied. "Not duty, not orders, choice." It was assumed to be debris or an automated pod. Sereth ordered a quiet search of long-range sensors and border records, not through official military channels but through trade routes, salvage guilds, and civilian traffic logs. Humans moved through those spaces more often than Imperial fleets did. Days passed, then weeks, then a signal appeared, a distress call from a fringe system outside Imperial influence. Old, repeating, human-coded. The signal did not ask for rescue. It listed coordinates, population count, hostile presence. Sereth stared at the translation. "He's still doing it," she whispered. The council objected when she proposed a mission. "That region is unstable," one minister said, "outside our jurisdiction." Sereth stood before them, her posture straight, her voice steady. "A human once stood alone to protect the future of this empire. I will not ignore him now." The ship she chose was not a war vessel. It was fast, well-shielded, and marked as a diplomatic courier. She took only a small escort and insisted on a human liaison aboard. Ambassador Helen Cross joined her personally. "You don't owe us this," Helen said quietly as the ship prepared to depart. Sereth looked out at the stars. "I do not know what I owe," she said. "But I know what I refuse to repeat." Alien mixed. Sereth watched the scans in disbelief. He stayed. "This was never meant to last," one of Sereth's guards murmured. "And yet it did," she replied. "They found him near the central habitat ring." Elias Ward stood between a group of frightened civilians and a sealed blast door. His hair was gray now, his armor mismatched and worn. One arm moved stiffly, clearly injured, but his stance was the same as in the old footage. Forward, protective. When he saw them, his weapon lowered slightly. "Evacuation finally came," he said. His voice was rough but steady. Sareth stepped forward, her breath caught in her throat. "You know who I am." That's all. Only then did he allow himself to sit. As medics worked, Sareth stood nearby, unsure what words could exist between them. "You were never honored," she said finally. He gave a tired smile. "Didn't need it." "Then change it." And the Empire would never be the same again. The return journey felt longer than the trip out. The ship moved smoothly through known space, but inside, everything felt heavy with meaning. Elia's ward rested in the medical bay, his injuries finally being treated. The medics worked carefully, surprised by how long he had endured without proper care. His body showed signs of age, stress, and old wounds that had never fully healed. Yet his vital signs were steady. Sareth visited him often, though she never stayed long. She would stand near the doorway, watching quietly as if afraid that speaking might break something fragile between them. Elias noticed. "You don't have to hover," he said one time, his voice weak but calm. Sareth stepped inside. "I am not hovering," she replied. "I am learning." Ambassador Helen Cross stood beside her. The elders watched closely, their expressions tight. "You acted without approval," one elder said immediately. "Yes," Sareth replied. "You endangered yourself," another added. "Yes." Elias was brought in on a mobility platform. He wore simple clothing now, imperial-issued but unmarked. He looked out of place among the polished floors and ancient symbols. He did not bow. He did not speak unless spoken to. The council studied him like a problem they had delayed solving. "This individual violated multiple borders," a minister said. "He operated without authorization. Not because they were wrong, but because they were inconvenient." When silence returned, Sareth turned to him. "Do you wish to speak?" Archived footage was quietly restored. Scholars began asking questions. Citizens watched the old security image of a lone human standing in the corridor again and again. Some felt discomfort, others felt awe. Elias was offered honors, medals, titles, a place in imperial history. He declined them all. "I didn't do it for reward," he told Sareth during one quiet conversation in the palace gardens. "I know," she replied, "but others need to see what you represent." "So we do." The voices of the elders echoed through the chamber, naming her empress. Then she raised a hand. "I will not begin my reign with silence," she said. She gestured toward Elias. "This human was erased from our history because his existence challenged our pride," she continued. "That ends today. But we failed to see what they do with the time they have." He shifted slightly, uncomfortable, but he did not step away. Sareth continued. "From this moment forward, humanity will be recognized as a guardian species, not servants, not expendable forces, but partners in protection." Later, in a quiet corridor far from ceremony and cameras, Elias prepared to leave. A transport waited to take him back to the human enclave. He felt out of place in the palace, always had. Sareth met him there. "You are free to go wherever you wish," she said, "or to stay. You are remembered now." It was a responsibility, to remember those who stood in the dark, to never again erase courage just because it came from unexpected hands, and to ensure that when the galaxy needed someone to stand, the Empire would stand beside humanity, not above it. The weeks after the Ascension were unlike anything the Empire had known before. Change moved slowly through ancient systems, but once it began, it could not be stopped. Empress Sareth ruled with calm focus, her presence steady, her decisions deliberate. She listened more than she spoke, and when she spoke, people paid attention. Across the Empire, old records were opened. Not erased this time, restored. Citizens watched the recovered footage again and again. The lone human in the corridor, the sealed doors, the quiet refusal to retreat. For many, it was the first time they had seen a human not as background labor or temporary help, but as the center of the moment that saved their future. Reactions were mixed. Some elders resisted. They argued tradition, hierarchy, order. Others felt something close to shame. But among the younger generation, something else grew: respect. Human embassies reported a change almost immediately: fewer dismissive meetings, fewer delayed responses, more questions, honest ones. What drives you? Why do you stay? How do you endure? Ambassador Helen Cross noticed it first. She stood in the viewing hall of the human enclave, watching imperial ships move in careful patterns outside. For the first time, they were not being ignored. "They're finally looking at us," one of her aides said. Helen nodded. "They always saw us. They just didn't think we mattered." He settled on a modest human colony near the edge of imperial space. It was peaceful, agricultural, the kind of place where people knew each other's names. He repaired tools, helped with maintenance, and avoided attention. But attention followed him anyway. Humans came to him with questions, not about medals or politics, but about choice. "Why didn't you leave?" one young engineer asked. Elias thought for a moment. Because someone was still there. Now they were being asked to define something they had always done quietly. They chose simple words: "We protect." Sareth watched these changes from the high windows of the palace. Reports arrived daily: diplomatic shifts, military doctrine updates, cultural studies being rewritten. One report stood out: human casualties in mixed-species operations had dropped significantly. Not because humans were being shielded, but because others were staying with them. The Empire was learning. Months later, a crisis tested everything. A border system fell into chaos after a massive infrastructure failure. Power grids collapsed. Life support began to fail. Millions were trapped. Imperial fleets hesitated. The system was unstable. Risk assessments predicted heavy losses. Sareth read the reports in silence. Then she issued a single command. "We go," she said, "together." Losses were fewer than predicted. The galaxy noticed. Stories spread, not just of human courage, but of an empire willing to change. Sareth addressed the council afterward. "We were never weak for needing help," she said. "We were weak for refusing to see it." Still held power, but it no longer believed power was its only value. Human children grew up hearing Elias Ward's name not as a legend but as an example, not of greatness but of choice. Alien children learned the story too, taught not as myth but as history. A human stood, an empire lived. One quiet evening, Sareth received a message from the Edge colony where Elias lived. He had declined every invitation to return to the capital, but he had sent a short transmission, just a few words: "Kids doing fine, empire's doing better. Guess it worked." She understood now that the greatest strength in the galaxy was not immortality, or weapons, or empires. It was the willingness to stand when walking away would be easier. And that was something humanity had given the galaxy without ever asking for credit. From that day forward, when danger rose and systems failed, when plans broke and hope thinned, a simple phrase spread through fleets and councils alike: "Find the humans."